Today on RoxomTV News, Iran announces productive conversations and then follows it up with 7 waves of missiles in under 10 hours, which is a bold interpretation of the word productive. Bill Cosby has been ordered to pay $60 million for a case from 1972, a reminder that some stories don't fade with time, they just wait for a different courtroom. A federal judge is weighing whether the United States government can label a domestic AI company a national security risk, which feels like the kind of decision that quietly redraws the lines for an entire industry. Meanwhile, airport security lines are blowing past 3 hours as TSA agents go unpaid, ICE agents get deployed, and Congress gets ready to leave town because apparently gridlock pairs nicely with boarding delays. And a new study finds the people most impressed by corporate jargon are also the worst at thinking clearly, which finally explains how Circle Back survived as a strategy. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Bitcoin is currently trading around $69,000. And before we get into our top stories of the morning, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV and Roxom TV News so you are staying up to date with everything that's going on in the world. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get into our top stories of the morning. First up, Israel is dealing with the aftermath after Iran launched 7 waves of missiles in under 10 hours. In Tel Aviv, one ballistic missile carrying roughly 100 kilograms of explosives tore through a residential building, leaving a crater in the road and crushing surrounding vehicles. Hours earlier, Donald Trump had announced a 5-day pause in what he called productive conversations toward a deal. Take a look.
Iran's foreign ministry says you're not telling the truth when it comes to productive conversations.
Well, they're going to have to get themselves better public relations people. We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement.
Yes.
Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict, and I think it'll end it very, very substantially.
Now, Iran is calling Trump's claim fake news, accusing the United States of trying to manipulate oil markets, while an Israeli official said a deal does not appear tangible right now. So the war is in its 25th day, the pause is 24 hours old, and the strikes haven't slowed. Now, what this suggests is that whatever conversations may be happening behind the scenes, they are not yet translating into anything that changes behavior on the ground. In the United States and across global markets, a Truth Social post from President Donald Trump claiming very good and productive conversations with Iran sent the Dow Jones up 631 points, pushed the S&P higher, and knocked oil prices down. Now, before that, Asian markets had been sliding hard, with South Korea down 6.5% and trading briefly suspended in Seoul, while Japan dropped 3.5%, so that single post flipped the entire session. Then, overnight, Iran launched 7 missile waves into Israel, and the market narrative changed just as quickly. Oil has climbed back above $100 this morning, erasing the earlier gains. And at this point, markets are reacting to signals that can reverse within hours, depending on whether developments match the messaging. And for those of you tuning in from home, that means everything from your investments to fuel costs is now tied to a situation where sentiment can swing faster than the underlying reality. And a federal courtroom in San Francisco is now at the center of a case that could redefine how the government treats U.S. tech companies. Today, a federal judge is hearing Anthropic's request for a preliminary injunction over a Pentagon supply chain risk designation. Now, that label has historically been used for foreign adversaries like Huawei, not domestic companies, which is why this case is drawing so much scrutiny. Now, Anthropic argues the designation is being used as leverage in a contract dispute, while the government has not committed to avoiding further action before trial. Microsoft and 22 retired military chiefs have filed in support of Anthropic, adding significant pressure to the situation. And the hearing was fast-tracked, and a ruling is expected in the coming days. Now, what's at stake here is how far the government can go in labeling domestic companies as security risks, because that kind of authority, once expanded, tends to shape how entire industries operate moving forward. And if you're standing in a 3-hour TSA line right now, it's not because everyone suddenly decided to travel at the same time. It's because the people screening you haven't been getting paid. At airports across the United States, about 50,000 TSA officers have been working without pay since February 14th, and the cracks are starting to show in some very real ways. More than 400 officers have already quit. Call-out rates are spiking above 50% in some airports like Houston Hobby and nearly 30% at JFK, which is not exactly a system built to absorb that kind of absence. And the result is exactly what you'd expect. Security lines stretching past 3 hours at major airports. So what's the solution here? Well, the Trump administration is now deploying ICE agents to 14 airports to help move those lines along. Not to replace the TSA, but to stand in for them, handling crowd control, guarding exits, basically anything that frees up the remaining TSA officers to keep the system functioning. Because here's the underlying problem. This isn't a staffing issue that happened organically. It's a funding issue. Congress hasn't funded the Department of Homeland Security since mid-February, and TSA falls under the DHS. Democrats are holding up funding over demands for ICE reform after the fatal shootings of 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis earlier this year, while the administration is framing it as a Democrat DHS shutdown. So what you're seeing play out at the airport is really a proxy battle over immigration policy. Meanwhile, TSA agents are dealing with the consequences directly. They're getting eviction notices, having cars repossessed, and some airports are literally running food drives for the people responsible for screening passengers. And here's where it gets even more surreal. ICE, which is also part of the DHS, is still fully funded. So the government is taking paid immigration agents and sending them to airports where unpaid security agents are quitting. On paper, ICE agents aren't doing TSA's job. They're not running x-ray machines or doing pat-downs. They're handling support roles so TSA can focus on screening. But in practice, the optics are doing a lot of the work here. Trump posted over the weekend that ICE agents at airports would also be arresting undocumented immigrants and specifically referenced Somali migrants. Critics, including the NAACP, have called this the deployment of Trump's secret police at airport checkpoints, raising concerns about profiling and intimidation. And the Department of Homeland Security isn't offering much clarity. They've declined to say how many ICE agents are deployed where or exactly what they're doing, citing operational security, which means the public is left filling in the blanks here, and both sides are sticking to their scripts. The administration says this is a necessary stopgap to keep airports functioning. Democrats say the administration created the crisis and is now using it to justify a more aggressive enforcement presence. Both arguments have some truth to them. Neither one gets TSA officers paid, though, and that's really the part that matters when you zoom out here. Because this isn't just a political story, it's an operational one. The system that screens roughly 2.5 million passengers a day is being held together by people who aren't being paid and are starting to walk away. And instead of fixing the underlying issue, funding the agency, we're seeing a workaround where a completely different agency is brought in to stand in the lobby, which works until it doesn't. Because at a certain point, long lines turn into missed flights. Missed flights turn into economic friction, and economic friction turns into a broader problem that doesn't stay contained to just the airport. And right now, that line between inconvenience and real disruption is getting thinner by the day. All right, joining me to talk about this story and others, the man that can connect the dots like no one else, RoxomTV's own Nolan Bauerle, everybody. Nolan, happy Tuesday. Always great to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm enthusiastic about the future of flying, about going to the airport, about not waiting in lines, about maybe the end of the TSA regime. We'll see. We'll see.
Ooh, I really needed that optimism this morning, Nolan. So let's get into it because it seems like you've got a different beat on things than I do right now, and I'm excited to talk about it. Because right now, the core issue we're seeing is that these TSA agents aren't being paid while the ICE agents are fully funded and being deployed to airports. What does that reveal to you about how resources are being prioritized inside the government right now, Nolan? What is your beat on this initial situation here? Because it's an interesting one.
Yeah, well, I think the funding for ICE was baked in before, so it's just a matter of convenience. But I think the larger story is something that Trump suggested during the election, and I think most Americans are there. The TSA really only got involved in airport security after 9/11, and they haven't been exactly doing a great job. Most Americans are disgusted with the experience, and you can tell right away what a stupid experience we enjoy in America if you go to civilized airports like in Singapore or Doha or any of these places where all you need to get into the airport is a ticket, and then you're in the airport. It's like a mall. And then every gate has its own security screening situation. And the actual airlines themselves, which is what we had in America before 9/11, the airlines themselves are responsible for getting the security cleared into the gate. So I think this is just one of those instances where pick a government agency, they're not going to do a good job. The whole thing is stupid. No one likes it. It
Mhm.
doesn't work. And we have this very obvious system that works in other places in the world very well without any of the indignity that we enjoy in America of everyone herded into the same five machines. What exactly is the problem here? We can't
Mhm.
afford 50 separate machines for 50 separate gates or something like that. We have to use the same gates for the same machines for everyone
Mhm.
going through a choke point. None of it makes sense. So, it's an instance here where finally Americans are seeing that there probably is no remedying the system as it is. Trump did suggest and float the idea during the campaign that he would put the airlines back in charge. I say that is the answer no matter what. I don't think refunding these guys, giving them more money, anything like that's going to help. It was a disaster before. American airports are some of the worst in the world when it comes to this stuff. They're almost
Mhm.
unusable when it comes to international transfers. I've done a few international transfers to the United States in my life. It's the worst experience in the world. You got to go out through immigration, then back through immigration to get back in, and back through
Mhm.
security. You fly to a place like Qatar and you go through security as if you're a domestic passenger. They assume the security was done when you arrive there. And then again, every
Mhm.
gate has its own security. So you're just in the airport waiting for your next flight. You just walk to your next flight. You don't have to go
Yeah.
right through out a baggage check and then back in, get, the whole system. So it's a disaster in America. It's by far the least streamlined system in the world. It makes no
Mhm.
sense. And this might be what we all need to get the government out of the game in general. Why do US budget fights have anything to do with the lineups we wait for in the American airports? A pox
Mhm.
on all of their houses for doing this to Americans and having American airports be the worst now for 2 decades. They've been the worst in the world by a mile. And so
Mhm.
the opportunity to fix it, I think, is more obvious than ever. Force the airlines back into the job and streamline it.
I think there's a lot of truth there, Nolan, but this situation I think is a little bit more complex than it might be at face value, right? Because we had what was going on with ICE in Minnesota. Then Trump kind of walked that back, given we saw those two deaths, and now he's putting them in the airports, right? And part of the reason we said is he wanted to check undocumented immigrants, right? The thing is, if you go to an airport, you got to have documentation on you. So I don't know if that's really the best use of ICE's funds and services if you're sending to a place where literally everybody has to have documentation on them. And there's also a lot of people out there, specifically within the other side of the aisle, that is saying that like what this is. A lot of people have this feeling that what this is Trump maybe kind of getting us used to more of like a militaristic state. Because I was at the airport yesterday, I saw ICE there. They weren't doing anything. They were literally just standing around. They weren't assisting anybody. And in fact, I saw people with their phones out and stuff on them. They were unwilling to do anything because they weren't masked. And that's another part about this, right? Is they won't sign the bill funding the DHS. The Democrats won't sign off on it unless they have some of these things like they can't have ICE people with masks on and stuff. I would love to get what is your thought on that? That what we're seeing with ICE at airports might be a lot bigger than simply helping the TSA while the shutdown is impacting their operations.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say, the framing of more used to a military let's say environment is one way to put it. I would say there is some persuasion there. So not quite persuasion. Persuasion is indeed when you get people used to something in order for them
Hmm.
to accept it later. And if you heard Trump yesterday, and if you heard what people have been saying about the biggest issue in Congress right now or in the Senate, which is the Save America Act, the Voter ID Act. Trump has been saying for a long time that the ICE guys are going to be at the voting booths in November for the midterms to make sure that non-citizens don't vote. So
Hmm.
it is related to a persuasion thing. I don't know about military environment. I would say that's a
It felt
political
weird.
frame. Yeah, yeah. Well,
It was weird.
it is, nobody likes it, but there are millions of people that are in the country, and a lot of people voted for them to be out of the country. So this is a very transparent part of the mandate. You look at what happened in Washington, D.C. with the deployment of the National Guard. The mayor loves it. The people love it. They keep saying it's working. The normal faculties didn't work when it comes to crime mitigation in Washington, D.C. It's along those lines. So, indeed, I'm sympathetic to the idea of the masks. I mean, I can see why people are arguing for that, but it all comes down in the end to voter ID. So I do think Trump is performing persuasion. I do think he's doing some prompting, prompt engineering, getting people used to seeing ICE. Airports are a corollary to seeing them at the voting booth, and I think you will see them at the voting booth in November. So that part of it's true. I wouldn't say that the military context, I mean, that's a political thing, right? MAGA people would see it differently. Democrats would see it differently. So it's more or less the politics help dictate what you end up seeing. But I do think there is truth to the idea of persuasion here. Yes.
I mean, I'm pretty middle. No, like I will admit, like what was that saying? Like if you're young, if you're young and not a Democrat, you have no heart. But if you're old and Republican, you have no head, right? I fall very much in the middle there. And I just tell you, it was spooky. It felt like the on ramp to something more down the line. Like I mean, like, do you expect this to be a real solution, or is this just a temporary stopgap to this problem? And like, do you actually see them agreeing on something? Because I think the Democrats' requests for this were pretty reasonable. They were just like, they can't cover their face was one of them, and they should have body cameras, which we expect all of our federal agents and police officers to do so. Do you think at any point Trump is going to acquiesce to that? Because to me, that sounded pretty reasonable.
No, because no matter what they negotiate with, they're going to be called Gestapo anyway. So a lot of these people are rightfully worried for their lives. Now, I don't like the idea of masks again, and I don't want
Got to have
harm
accountability,
people around.
don't you?
Of course you do. Of course you do. But what accountability did we have when you see on legacy media they call Trump Hitler, dictator, MAGA people are fascists, Nazis? You have a
That's
very
different.
no,
Though,
but
than giving people masks and they're killing, American citizens. Like that really emboldens
well,
people to act outside of the law.
well, sure, it emboldens people to go and be heroes against some Nazi occupation, which is what happened in Minnesota in the first place. These guys really do believe they're stopping a Nazi occupation and that kind of stuff. And where does that kind of rhetoric come from? I mean, for people to say that they're not calling MAGA people Nazis for 4 or 5 years now that's what happens. That's what's going on out there.
I mean, if it looks like a Nazi and smells like a Nazi, or they're in the streets arresting their own citizens, like, I mean, you could say that's part of the narrative, but when you see it in practice, does that not kind of send a message to you a little bit about maybe where things could be heading? And I don't know, I'm not somebody who's like, oh, this is going to be some fascist country, but like, if it looks and smells like it, is it surprising people are calling it as such?
Again, I think I get why they're saying it. And I can see where the narrative is being constructed. But again, you have to go back to, did you hear anyone apologize for the rhetoric around Charlie Kirk? No, I don't like invoking Charlie Kirk. I mean, a lot of people use it as sort of a trump card these days. But remember, there's assassins out there killing people, and it's because they really do genuinely believe they're standing up to a Nazi occupation. This is before there was anything to do with ICE. And you never heard one person walk that down. They went right back to it. You're hearing it every day. Hakeem Jeffries in Congress. They've been saying that kind of stuff for a long time. So there isn't a lot of de-escalation going on anywhere. And it's not an easy job to be an ICE officer, that's for sure. And they're definitely targeted. You've heard it a million times, people saying, we're going to go to your house, we're going to get you for doing this. This is not made up. This is not fiction. No one did anything about Antifa for 8 years. They were around. And the MAGA base, this is one of their big deceptions of Donald Trump. They warned Donald Trump in 2017 when the first Berkeley beatdown happened and Antifa came and beat Milo Yiannopoulos and all kinds of people up when they were doing the early freedom of speech, Trump won the election stuff, and there was never any recourse. This kind of violence went on, and Trump never stood in front of MAGA people at that time. He let them all twist in the wind back then. This was one of the original instances. This was brought up by people in the White House saying, Trump, when are you going to defend MAGA people from Antifa? It never happened. And then you had the summer of 2020 and all of that kind of violence. And from there, it was 4 years of Antifa running around cities, threatening people, and that just never got the kind of traction. So there's no trust anywhere around. We're not in
Hmm.
an environment where we're even able to bring up like, oh, it looks like fascism. I thought Antifa looked like fascism. I mean, it really did,
Hmm.
right? And you can see the psychological projection there, anti-fascist. Well, I mean, not so much. So we're not in an environment where we're dealing with ideals. The benchmark that we can possibly aspire to right now is just not this world. We're in something else entirely. And it's not a good place to be. I'm not happy about
Hmm.
it. I remember the first time I ever saw police officers with automatic weapons was in Europe. And I was absolutely shocked. I had never seen that in my life, being on the French subway, and the police just had, I don't know, AK-47s or something. And that
Hmm.
made me feel really uneasy. I'd never seen anything like that in America. And now we have it, right? That was something that was
Hmm.
so strange to see 20 years ago in Europe. And now when you look at it in an American airport, it's commonplace today. But we're simply not in that position anymore. There is no trust up or down between MAGA, outside of MAGA, Democrats with MAGA, Republicans with Democrats. Nothing like that is happening. So definitely not an optimal situation, but it's not easy to put on a good versus bad filter. The only thing I can see that's good coming out of this is the potential to get government completely out of airport security because of how untasteful all of it is. Now,
Hmm.
the ICE question domestically in America, Trump has a mandate for that. He was elected literally for that. I agree, the masks, you don't want to see it, but that was part of the mandate. This isn't some rug pull. This was democratically elected in the United States. This is what people wanted.
Yeah, but you talk about like this good versus bad, filter, right? But if you objectively look at some of the actions we've seen recently, and you took party lines aside, and you just said, "I'm looking at this objectively," I'd be like, "This is bad." And you're seeing this now turn in the Republican Party. You're seeing this in the poly markets. They just came out recently. They're saying it's very likely that Democrats take the House and the Senate in midterms. So it's like at a certain point, people need to, I think, stop thinking along party lines and just start objectively thinking at these as one instance at a time. Is this good or bad for the people of this country? And right now, it seems like the majority, for the first time in a long time, is starting to kind of push back on some of these things we've been seeing. I don't know what the answer is. Again, I have no real horse in this race. I don't really love either side of the aisle right now. It's just like I'm looking at this objectively, and I'm like, this isn't good.
Yeah.
This isn't good. And I feel like a pawn. I feel like we are all pawns and chess pieces in this bigger game that is being played, and the stakes are huge, but
Well,
we're
that
just
is
there as
that's
pieces.
100% certainly true. There's
And
no doubt
it's and
about
I
that.
yeah,
There's
and I
no
feel like
doubt
that
about
more than
that.
ever.
And
Yeah.
but Trump, right, the only way to reach him is through his base, and his base is not complaining about this. So there is no other way to access Trump. He will not be pressured from the media. He will not be pressured from Democrats. If his base starts crying about this, he will change it. Um,
I mean,
but the
he's
base is
losing the middle right now.
yeah, that's not how he makes his decisions. Unfortunately
Yeah.
for a lot of people, he looks at his base and really adheres to what they want. And that's a populist in a nutshell. If it costs him the midterms, I think he's willing to risk that. But that's where how you get to Trump is from his base. His base is simply happy with this. So he
Yeah.
will get to
I guess he only listens to his caroling sycophants at the farthest reaches of his side of the aisle. So, he loves that echo chamber. He certainly does. All right. We're going to take a break here, Nolan. But when we're back, Nolan and I are going to be chatting about more of today's top stories, including the New York Stock Exchange going to be tokenizing stocks. Whew, we got a lot to talk about. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV news coming right back after this.
maybe.
Maybe. Should I keep going? It's a live show, guys. Sometimes these things happen. So we're going to break here in a second. But
I like the passion on that, Hank. It's important to stake out your point of view, particularly
Mhm.
when these times of change happen. And indeed, feeling like a pawn is I think what is going on. It's been that way for a long time in American politics, and that it's actually coming to the surface, I think, is a benefit for all of us. That we can actually all see now that on either side, the country was not what we thought it was, and something else is going on.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like it reminds me of like it's like the pimple that we're pushing to the surface and we need it to pop before we can start the healing can really begin here. So I don't know, just going to the airport yesterday was a real surreal experience. It reminded me of like being in parts of Mexico where I'll see just like guys carrying like assault rifles and I'm like, this
Mhm.
isn't what
No,
any of us
no, no, no.
signed up for.
Yeah,
I don't think.
yeah.
Guys, should we keep moving on? No breaks. So I'll just keep going. No graphics. Okay, well, we're just gonna move on to the next story, and then I'm gonna bring you back, Nolan. No one will stay on. Okay, Nolan, well, you get to stay on and react to me reading this story in real time. This will be fun. All right, so our next one, the stock market's getting rid of its switch. It's off switch, and that changes more than just trading hours. You see, the New York Stock Exchange is teaming up with the Securitize to bring stocks and funds onto blockchain rails with the long-term goal of enabling 24/7 trading. And the idea is to make equities behave more like Bitcoin. No closing bell, no fixed schedule, just continuous global access from anywhere in the world. And on paper, that sounds like progress. We're talking faster settlements, broader access, and a more modern system that isn't tied to a physical exchange floor. But structurally, this isn't a revolution. These assets are still issued and controlled by institutions, which means even if they live on a blockchain, they're not open or permissionless like Bitcoin. So the system becomes more efficient, but not more decentralized. At the same time, something else is driving this shift. Platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi are exploding by turning everything into a trade. Elections, wars, headlines, and people are increasingly drawn to constant participation. So Wall Street isn't only upgrading infrastructure, it's responding to behavior. And that's where this starts to matter in everyday life, because when markets never close, access increases, but so does the pressure to stay engaged, to keep checking, and to keep reacting. And once that becomes the norm, the real question isn't whether markets are more efficient, it's whether people end up investing more thoughtfully or simply trading more often. Nolan, what are your thoughts on this initially? 24/7 trading, and like, how do you think that's going to impact Bitcoin? Because I think we've talked about it before. Bitcoin's kind of the weekend canary in the coal mine, but now it sounds like it's open to everybody.
Well, I think it is more about the New York Stock Exchange and those infrastructure providers actually trying to claw back some relevancy. Because the truth is, the New York Stock Exchange is really just a TV studio now. Now, there's entities that use it, it has some liquidity, it issues for IPOs, so it still has some primary functions. But
Mm-hmm.
the stock exchange is not really the venue of trading anymore. The venue of trading moved to the Bloomberg terminal. That's really where trading happens. And the Bloomberg terminal has to still rely on back ends for settlement. That's why it's all T+3. So it takes 3 days to settle these transactions. Bitcoin and that infrastructure of real-time settlement really does offer a structural advantage, and it can actually help a stock exchange peel back some of the power to be the venue of exchange again, which is not what it is
Mm-hmm.
right now. And so seeing this, I think this is just typical market competition amongst legacy participants. And
Mm-hmm.
this looks like more of a play to try and claw back what Bloomberg has done to trade venues to make them digitized, and that their Bloomberg terminal is how trades are executed and it is the venue of exchange now. This is a way
Mm-hmm.
of reestablishing the old venue, getting it out of being just a TV studio into something like an infrastructure provider again. Because once you use a blockchain, the issuance becomes the big the big infrastructure play. And that is still their strong suit. Bloomberg isn't an issuer. So reinvigorating issuance, reinvigorating that IPO piece is probably in the best interest of the New York Stock Exchange. And Jeffrey Sprecher, who is the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange of ICE, came to Bitcoin in a very strange way, because came to markets in a very strange way. He noticed that Enron was a scam in the early days and was funded and really started ICE, International Continental Exchange, as a play against the corruption of the Enron energy exchange market. And that's what ended up giving him his big success, which gave him all kinds of capacity to go and buy the New York Stock Exchange after he did not own the New York Stock Exchange at first. He ends up
Mm-hmm.
becoming successful because he inherited the market failures and the market manipulation behind Enron. And so he understands already. He's not a natural trader. He just sees these advantages. Even his Bitcoin origin story is hilarious. He's a
Mm-hmm.
Porsche mechanic, and
Oh.
he couldn't get a part. And this is in like 2014. It took him forever to pay for the part from Germany. And so he found out about Bitcoin because he's like, I can just send this guy Bitcoin instead of the bank correspondence networks. And that's literally how he became a Bitcoiner. So he is an innovative guy. He's been at the forefront of a lot of this stuff. He's not a
Mhm.
typical fella from markets. He's not a typical Wall Street guy. And I think this is someone who just understands plumbing and understands
Mhm.
how he can reassert some relevancy into the industry. So it makes sense that they're first doing this.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up Enron, which really brought me back because I don't know if you know this. So I'm from Chicago, and the main guy at Enron is the brother of Tom Skilling, who's like this beloved weatherman in Chicago. But his brother was the main guy at Enron and went to the clink. So it's just weird as Chicago because we all grew up loving Tom Skilling, and then we found out his brother was
Was
the
a
main guy
scammer.
at Enron. Yeah, he was a scammer. It was a real hit to the Chicago community. I don't think we've quite recovered, but that's okay. I need a break now just to kind of process this. But Nolan and I are back. We got a lot more coming your way, including Trump's ties DHS funding to the SAVE Act and what that means going forward. So stay tuned. Nolan and I will be back with more news coming your way right after this. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. If you're flying anytime soon, the biggest risk might not be turbulence, it's whether there's enough staff to get you through security. In Washington, D.C., the government shutdown is now colliding directly with airport operations, as Trump told the Senate Republicans there will be no Department of Homeland Security deal unless Democrats pass the SAVE Act, a voter ID bill that already failed the Senate vote last week. Meanwhile, TSA is losing officers fast, with around 400 quitting, call-out rates climbing above 50% at some airports, and ICE agents being deployed to help staff checkpoints. The acting TSA deputy administrator has warned that smaller airports could close entirely if conditions don't improve before the next pay cycle. At the same time, Senate leadership is preparing to leave for a 2-week break, which would pause negotiations while the pressure continues to build. Now, this shutdown hits its 40th day on Friday, and every day Congress is out is another day TSA workers aren't getting paid. And what this really comes down to is leverage, because an immediate visible problem, airport security, is now being tied to a broader political fight. And the longer that connection holds, the more likely everyday travel disruptions become part of the negotiating strategy. Kalshi is now somehow managing to be criminally charged, banned, and targeted by Congress all at the same time, which is usually a sign you've either broken the system or exposed it. Here in the United States, from Arizona to Nevada to Washington, D.C., prediction markets have gone from a clever workaround to a full-blown regulatory problem almost overnight. At the center of it is Kalshi, which just got hit with 20 criminal charges in Arizona, banned outright in Nevada after a judge ruled its contracts are illegal gambling, and already shut down earlier this year in Massachusetts. And now Congress is stepping in. Senators Adam Schiff and John Curtis introduced the Prediction Markets Are Gambling Act, the first bipartisan federal bill aimed directly at sports-style betting on prediction markets. Now, if passed, it would ban any CFTC-registered platform from offering contracts tied to sports or anything resembling casino games like poker or blackjack, which sounds pretty straightforward until you understand how these platforms have been operating. You see, prediction markets like Kalshi register with the CFTC as designated contract markets, meaning they're treated like financial exchanges instead of gambling platforms. Now, that technical distinction has allowed them to offer what are effectively sports bets nationwide, even in places like Utah, where gambling is completely illegal. And the scale here, it's massive. You see, Kalshi's Super Bowl contract alone hit $1 billion in trading volume this year. That's up 2,700% year over year, and March Madness contracts have already crossed 100 million. So this isn't some niche corner of the internet anymore. This is a rapidly growing financial product that looks a lot like betting. At the same time, the industry's behavior isn't exactly helping its case. And Polymarket, meanwhile, opened a cocktail bar in Washington called the Situation Room, where people can bet on missile strikes while having a drink. Just blocks from the CFTC headquarters. Great. So in the same week, you've got companies being charged, banned, legislated against, and also hosting themed cocktail nights about geopolitics. Now, the bill itself is pretty surgical. It doesn't touch FanDuel or DraftKings, which operate under state-level regulation. It specifically targets these federally registered platforms, turning what's been a state-by-state fight into a federal one. And traditional gaming groups are backing it. The Indian Gaming Association and California Nations Gaming Association have both endorsed the bill, calling it a response to federal overreach from the CFTC. Kalshi, unsurprisingly, is pushing back and hard. They argue the bill is driven by casino interests trying to eliminate competition and that banning regulated platforms would simply push actively offshore to push activity, to offshore crypto-based exchanges with no oversight. And that's not a hypothetical either. We've seen this before. When regulated options disappear, the activity doesn't stop. It simply moves somewhere harder to track and harder to control. Now, here's where the story gets a little politically complicated. There's a potential conflict sitting right in the middle of the legislation. You see, Donald Trump Jr. sits on Polymarket's advisory board, and his venture capital firm has invested tens of millions into the company. At the same time, both the DOJ and CFPB dropped active investigations into Polymarket after Trump returned to the White House. And both Kalshi and Polymarket have recently explored valuations around $22 billion, which gives you a sense of how much money is tied up in this space. So now you have a bill that could directly impact companies with financial ties to the president's family, which makes the path forward for this legislation anything but straightforward. And stepping back, this is where the bigger issue comes into focus. Prediction markets have exploded from obscure to mainstream in under 3 years, and regulators are now trying to decide whether they're financial tools, gambling platforms, or something in between. If Congress shuts this down, the activity likely doesn't disappear. It shifts into less regulated environments. If they allow it, you're effectively creating a new category of nationwide betting under financial regulation. Either way, this isn't really about Kalshi anymore. It's about who gets to define what counts as a market and what counts as a bet. And right now, nobody seems entirely sure where that line actually is. All right, we're bringing Nolan back to chat about this one. Nolan, the shift we're seeing here is legal pressure coming from every direction all at once. We got Arizona criminal charges, Nevada bans, and now federal legislation. Does that signal a coordinated crackdown to you at all, or is this just regulators independently realizing how big this has gotten? What is your beat on this one?
Yeah, I think this is just one of these runaway social problems that we're only just catching up with. I mean, again, gambling in sports was looked at as universally bad for decades, since Shoeless Joe Jackson, whose life was completely ruined from the Black Sox scandal. And no one seemed to mind because of what it meant. And now suddenly it's gambling everywhere. Alex Leishman, the CEO and founder of River, a Bitcoin bank, just wrote an article this weekend about this whole phenomena and how it contrasts with Bitcoin, saying you wanted a financial revolution, you ended up getting a casino in your pocket. And he's been doing screenshots of like the minute he gets on to Coinbase, gamble, March Madness. He's been using various platforms to reiterate this. So this is something a lot of people are noticing. This almost seems non-partisan as well in a way. You can see a lot of Trump's supporters absolutely livid about what's going on with Polymarket and all of the scamming. A lot of people who are, critical of Trump in this case say, okay, the reason why it's even being kept dry, you don't hear a lot of Democrats crying about this, is because this is actually going to be the predicate for impeachment if that's what it comes to after the midterms, that the storyline for impeachment is this type of corruption. And that's why you're not seeing anyone cry about it today. And a lot of people, Mike Cernovich would be a great example. Mike Cernovich, just with that story anecdote I said earlier about Trump not taking Antifa seriously and protecting MAGA folks during the first administration, he's been sounding the alarm on the gambling thing from the very beginning, saying, live with this, you corrupt bastards, because this is what you're going to get if you lose the midterms. You're going to hang because of this Polymarket stuff. So there is a huge conversation out there about this. Now, the way I see it working out is you're not going to get rid of it. It looks like everything you said about the technical piece is all true. You can go offshore. Maybe there's going to be some limiting of sports on the apps. I doubt it. What you're going to end up seeing is the corruption of sports and the lack of interest in sports. That's probably the only way this goes, is that sports had some degree of credibility when gambling wasn't so institutionalized around it. But at this point, you look at all these videos of LeBron James being soft, has nothing to do with gambling, but you look at these videos from he's not as tough as Michael Jordan, he falls easily. You're not going to be able to tell the difference between cheating and not cheating for gambling pretty soon. You're going to see cheating for gambling very easily. NBA already had its scandal with the referees doing the calling to make sure games are swung in a certain way. If this infects all sports, you're going to simply lose sports. And maybe that's a good thing. Who knows? A lot of people's lives are completely dedicated to, sports all the time. So maybe it all went too far. Maybe it's all cyclical. But I don't think there's going to be a legal change. I think that the credibility of sports is on the line here, and people are cashing in and are going to actually sink the industry from all of this stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it definitely puts into puts the integrity of fair play like into question going forward, and we've already seen it, I believe, in some collegiate games, which makes a little. I almost feel like it's the colleges, even with the new rules where they're actually paying college athletes. It's just like who doesn't have money. But with that being said, we've seen lower level NBA players tank games and stuff before that had nothing to do with this. So you're right. It just kind of makes this a lot easier for people. And how would you know?
How would you know?
I mean,
A
how would you
pitcher,
know?
a right-handed specialist reliever lets a fat changeup hang out over the plate in the eighth
Right.
inning. No one would be able to know. There would be no way.
Yeah.
And
And
so I just see sports, and whether it's true or not, that's the problem, is that it's going to induce the doubt. And once the doubt is there, the drama is all gone. If there, it,
mhm.
just like people are always looking at the NFL these days and going, really? Like these Cinderella stories every year and these dramatic narratives around players. Kurt Warner was such a celebrity 20 years ago when he went from being a grocery bagger to the Super Bowl, and
Mhm.
no one believes those stories anymore. They watch it and they just simply can't believe it. So once
Yeah.
sports loses that mystique, once it loses the credibility, it actually can't get it back. And so the industry's playing with its actual whole existence. All of its credibility is on the line here. And
Mhm.
I don't think there's any other way this is headed besides the end of credibility in sports, and that no one will bet on it because it's a scam.
Let me ask you this, Nolan. If people are going to be willing to place bets and kind of harm the integrity of sports, doesn't that in a way kind of like harm the overall integrity of these platforms in a way that
Yeah.
we know that people are just straight up using them for their own personal
Yes.
gain? Because right now they are useful. I love wisdom of the crowd. But at a certain point, if we feel like there's so much of this, insider trading or whatever, wouldn't people just naturally be like, I'm not messing with these things because they're ripe for fraud and insider info? Like, couldn't that harm the entire idea of these prediction markets themselves as a whole?
Well, once you see sports completely wedded to this side of the game, it's not like set a good example for kids anymore, like it might have been in the 1980s and before. It used to be that athletes were supposed to be role models. That was already abandoned, and that was already a whole layer of fandom that they decided to live without. Now you look at what the sports are dealing with. None of them have a huge fan base of young people. They already left. Baseball did not court young people. Basketball did not court young people. Football did not court young people like they once did. And you're seeing the demographics of sports viewership age out. And
Mhm.
already, because the young people they're playing video games. They're way more interested in anime. They're way more interested in all these other fields than they are in sports. And so there's already a generation of young people that were not catered to. Again, they let the athletes, they embrace this sort of you're not role models anyway. They're just professionals with human flaws, which is fine. It's true. You didn't need to make them into myths and mythology. But how many of these demographics can they live without? You can
Mhm.
live without the young people for a little while because they don't spend the money on sports, so it's easy to squint and not miss them. But all of these sports have a demographic problem. And, they became very political as well. That released a whole bunch of fans. There's an entire group of conservative people that hated ESPN because they made everything about the political stuff. So that was already another group of fans they didn't seem to mind losing. And so they're replacing all these fans that they've lost with the gambling. And so structurally, the industry is nowhere near as healthy as it was 20 years ago. And I don't expect that to stop. I expect that trend to continue.
I don't know if I totally agree with that. The younger generation isn't being served by sports. I have much younger siblings who are all about it. All their friends are about it. The NFL is planning to expand internationally. Like, I don't know if that's really indicative of people not trusting the sports arenas right now. And NBA salaries, football salaries are higher than ever. And the only reason they're higher than ever is because they're making more money than ever. So, to you, is that really indicative of fledgling fan activity in the
Well,
sports
again,
world?
so that was the suggestion, is that they eliminated certain portions of their consumer base who weren't profitable yet, but they're not really investing in the future. So there are still young people interested in sports. I'm not trying to say it's zero, but it's
No,
not
I
like
don't
it
say that.
was 20 years ago. It really just isn't. There was an obsession 20 years ago, was sort of universal. I've seen a
Hmm.
lot of people, just because even the state of the world with political drama, the
Hmm.
drama of sports doesn't even seem like it's enough to sustain attention as it once was. I mean, this weekend,
Hmm.
I would say more people were monitoring the situation. More people were interested in the Poly Market Monitor the Situation Cafe to look at
Hmm.
bombs than they were sports. So the drama of sports, in contrast to the real drama of going through World War III, already took out a bit of interest in it. And then you look
Hmm.
at the political divisions. I don't know what the exact numbers are. I've heard people complain about lack of young people. And certainly when I was young, everybody watched sports. I'm not sure that's true anymore.
I think there's more that factors into that, though. I think one, the option, people have choice. It used to be like if there was NFL games on, that's what you were watching on Sundays because that was the biggest thing on TV. Now I can go to Netflix, I can watch whatever I want all the time. So we have more curated, entertainment experiences for people, which I think is part of it. And also, there's that phrase that I think lends itself now more than ever. You don't want to meet your heroes, right? Because
Mm.
now we have such an inside look of a lot of these athletes' lives. And back in the day, we're like, oh, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, like these are guys. These are the good guys. These are larger than life characters. But when
Mhm.
you pull back the veneer and see what people are really like beyond what the narratives that are formed by like media about these people, you're like, some of these guys aren't so great.
Mhm.
And it's like it makes it harder to root for them when it used to just be like there's Jordan and there's Magic, and they were both good. They were good and evil on their own sides, but they were on these pedestals. And now I feel like the athletes have all kind of been taken off them. At least a lot of them have, because we just hear all the bad stuff they do
Yeah.
all the time. And it's like I don't want to look up to them.
And I think you're going to see more of that. That's what I mean. Like if this gambling thing goes sideways, who's left watching sports? It's existential for them in the end.
Hmm.
That's what I mean about letting these demographics go that they didn't think were profitable enough. It's true. Little kids are literally your worst demographic when it comes to consumption in sports.
Hmm.
And by not investing in them, you're not creating the replacement layer. Now, I think sports will always exist in America. I don't think they're going away. But
Hmm.
this idea that everyone who's playing sports is a multimillionaire because all the world's economy is into consuming this content because it's the only real-time content around and it's got all these eyeballs and all these huge audiences and all this stuff is going on. I just think that world might be coming to an end. The idea of everyone having this shared experience watching sports is going away. If the gambling takes over entirely and the incentives take over entirely, and that's all they're left with, it would only take a few scandals to wipe that audience off the map. And what are they going to have after that? That's what I think is going to happen. I think they're just putting, because it's profitable. Like you said, I'm not denying that the sports industry is
Yeah.
getting richer. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Hmm.
It's not getting richer in a healthy base of consumers growing up at all different age levels, all different parts of the country, all different reasons for the love of the game, enjoying the drama of sports. The drama is less interesting. It got political. Now the money has come
Hmm.
in and has affected the numbers. There was a time when I would read the newspaper and only read the sports section. And as I would make a joke to people, because it's the only thing real in the newspaper, I would say everything else
Hmm.
is fake. At least sports is real. And it had that sort of refreshing aspect that, things happen in sports that you can't predict, that money can't
Right.
predict, that are just reality. Once doubt is injected into the system, once there is one shoeless Joe Jackson type story where clearly someone cheated, they get caught, and a bunch of people lose money because they bet on whatever, you're going to start getting the action reaction. You're not going to get away with that many stories. And in the end, it's Newtonian physics. It's going to repel people. We're not in the repelling stage yet. We're in the consolidation of the gambling demographics into sports as the primary audience for sports. And that is setting sports up for long-term structural weakness. It might look good now, but in the long run, I think it actually is a mortal danger to the way the industry works and how much they all get paid. And like you said, the pedestal stuff is a big deal. That's a part of it. That I would definitely say that the character of the athletes are also a part of this. Seeing them more, not having them controlled from a centralized media source. When it was like one guy on the beat, the Cubs had their two reporters, and then they knew who was sucky, and you had to be really bad, like Barry Bonds, for them to turn on you. Otherwise, he's a great guy. He hit a triple. He had a cycle. He's beating his wife at home after, and they don't say anything about it, right?
Yeah. Well, Nolan, I love your prognostications, but I really hope you're wrong about this one, because this was the best NFL season I could ever remember. And I got to give the NFL credit. You talk about these athletes and stuff getting into politics. It makes me think of you remember Colin Kaepernick?
Sure.
And he really got politicized, and they won't touch him with the 10-foot pole, even though, there were probably years he could have very well been a starting quarterback, because they're just like, we know this is not something we want to get into. The NFL is where both sides of the aisle come to forget about, politics and just watch people hit each other for a couple hours.
Yeah,
so
the Kaepernick is another one of those examples. I mean, the idea that you can't kneel at a thing, and it tainted the whole conversation after, because he wasn't the greatest quarterback, but I agree, he probably had a couple seasons left. He had a couple good, he made it to the Super Bowl for the San Francisco 49ers. And I've never understood, the American anthem and the flag, I'll never support any ban on burning the flag or protesting the anthem, simply because that's what makes it strong, that you can do that. And if you can't protest it, I mean, it's ridiculous. So now I don't hold the same opinions as Kaepernick, but I definitely defended him every day. People were criticizing him for the kneeling, because it means nothing if you can't protest it. It's that you can protest it that makes it strong. And so the weakness of freaking out and chimping out because people are protesting it, I think, is what got us into this trouble, though. It's what got us into this trouble. We have all this politicization of sports, like I said, and they're just not the same industry. Maybe they can survive, but indeed the prediction markets, I think, are an existential crisis for them.
Yeah. Well, you know what I would never protest, Nolan? Getting to talk shop with you here at Roxom TV. It's my favorite, and I want to thank you, as always, for your time, insights, and expertise. I love them. The audience love them. We're always here for it. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll be with you tomorrow to talk more shop.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nolan. Cheers, brother. All right, we're taking a break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we got more stories underway, including our special guest of the second hour. And if you haven't already, gang, what are you waiting for? Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV News. And if you got some extra time, you can check me out at Hank at Roxom TV on your platforms of choice. We'll be right back with our second hour of Roxom TV News coming your way right after this quick break, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. We are diving into our second hour of programming this morning, so let's get back into it. As Israel is dealing with the aftermath after Iran launched 7 waves of missiles in under 10 hours. In Tel Aviv, one ballistics missile carrying roughly 100 kilograms of explosives tore through a residential building, leaving a crater in the road and crushing surrounding vehicles. Hours earlier, Donald Trump had announced a 5-day pause in what he called productive conversations toward a deal. Listen in.
Iran's foreign ministry says you're not telling the truth when it comes to productive conversations.
Well, they're going to have to get themselves better public relations people. We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict, and I think it'll end it very, very substantially.
Now, Iran is calling Trump's claim fake news, which, let's be real, is hilarious, accusing the U.S. of trying to manipulate oil markets while an Israeli official said a deal does not appear tangible right now. So the war is in its 25th day, the pause is 24 hours old, and the strikes haven't slowed. Now, what this suggests is that whatever conversations may be happening behind the scenes, they are not yet translating into anything that changes behavior on the ground. In the United States and across global markets, a Truth Social post from Donald Trump claiming very good and productive conversations with Iran sent the Dow up 631 points, pushed the S&P higher, and knocked oil prices down. Before that, Asian markets had been sliding hard, with South Korea down 6.5% and trading briefly suspended in Seoul, while Japan dropped 3.5%, so that single post flipped the entire session. Then, overnight, Iran launched 7 missile waves into Israel, and the market narrative changed just as quickly. Oil has climbed back above $100 this morning, erasing the earlier gains. And at this point, the markets are reacting to signals that can reverse within hours, depending on whether developments match the messaging. And for anyone watching from home, that means everything from your investments to fuel costs is now tied to a situation where sentiment can swing faster than the underlying reality. A federal courtroom here in San Francisco is now at the center of a case that could redefine how the government treats U.S. tech companies. Today, a federal judge is hearing Anthropic's request for a preliminary injunction over a Pentagon supply chain risk designation. That label has historically been used for foreign adversaries like Huawei, not domestic companies, which is why this case is drawing so much scrutiny. You see, Anthropic argues the designation is being used as leverage in a contract dispute, while the government has not committed to avoiding further action before trial. Microsoft and 22 retired military chiefs have filed in support of Anthropic, adding significant pressure to the situation. And the hearing was fast-tracked, and a ruling is expected in the coming days. And what's at stake here is how far the government can go in labeling domestic companies as security risks, because that kind of authority, once expanded, tends to shape how entire industries operate going forward. All right, gang, we've got a real treat for you now. We are bringing in our special guest of today's second hour of programming. Now, most people talk about Bitcoin like it's something you trade, speculate on, or argue about online. But what if? What if the real unlock is making it something you earn, spend, and barely even think about? Well, one of the people leading that shift, quietly turning Bitcoin into a real-world financial product used every day, is the CEO and co-founder of Fold, and our guest this morning, Will Reeves, everybody. Will, welcome to the show. Happy Tuesday. It's great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, yeah, no, we're super thrilled, Will. And I want to start at the beginning with you here really quick because we've got a lot to talk about this morning. So I was doing my due diligence as well, and I was looking at your background. So from building consumer products to working in payments, you weren't exactly coming from what I would call a crypto native place. So what was it about Bitcoin that kind of got you curious and then eventually going all into it? I'd love to hear more about that story.
Yeah, well, it certainly didn't start off as what I would think of as being my profession or career in life. It was Bitcoin was something I had some incredible experiences with throughout my life, but in personal ways. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that I could actually combine the experiences that I had building products, technology in the Bay Area in California with something that I truly believed in, which was Bitcoin. And I think I had a kind of right time, right place. Fold, we started that. The initial kind of seeds of Fold were around 2017, 2016, really when Bitcoin was starting to finally kind of pierce the veil of mainstream adoption and awareness. And I felt there needed to be a product out there that was built for that group, not necessarily just for those, as you said, arguing online or trading as a speculative asset.
Yeah. And I'd be curious, Will. So when you first started thinking about Bitcoin, it sounds like you kind of looked at it from maybe a bit of a unique lens. Like a lot of people are seeing through it as like an everyday user when they start. But what was like your perspective given your background? Like how did you initially see Bitcoin, and has the way you viewed it kind of changed over time as you've learned more and become more integrated within the ecosystem itself?
I mean, my first experiences with Bitcoin were incredible, but they weren't necessarily what I would call for me. The
Hmm.
first time I had heard about Bitcoin, I was working in a for with an organization that brought in services to migrant workers that came through Sonoma Valley to pick for the wine harvest every year. And a group came up from Berkeley, pitching Bitcoin as an as a superior way to remit their wages back to their home countries. So for me, hearing that, I said, absolutely in support of free markets. I said this is an excellent technology for executing borderless payments that can't be
Hmm.
stopped and that don't have necessarily middlemen. But again, it wasn't necessarily for me. Later,
Hmm.
I was down in Argentina for an extended amount of time, and I met several people who are using it as a store of value to escape the uh, the economic downturns and sovereign defaults that were happening. And again, it
Hmm.
was, wow, this is an incredible technology, but is this really for me? I experienced it in during Occupy Wall Street a little bit when the PayPal accounts were getting shut down and Bitcoin became an alternative way of remitting payment to those that may have been censored at the time. So again, all three of those examples were fascinating to see a technology take off, and I thought it was something that needed to be in the world. I didn't quite see how it could benefit me and those that were closest to me with
Hmm.
yet. And that took a little bit longer. And once that clicked, I realized that I could use my background about building products and technology and bring it to everyday people. And that's really what Fold is a reflection of, is that use case. I realized, wow, this is something that is important to me and those that I love and know.
Yeah, and you really identified one of the big things about Bitcoin, right? It's like it's what it means to me, like personally, like throughout the me of everybody in the world, right, is so different. Like in the United States, Bitcoin is such a different thing to people who compared to people who aren't in Argentina right now, right? As you mentioned, who are getting killed with inflation and they need somewhere to actually store their value. When here in the United States, it feels like right now, okay, like we still think of it as maybe a tech stock. Ideally, it's akin to gold, like a digital gold, but not everybody really sees it that way just yet because we don't understand the problems it solves for us right now because those problems are different here than they are for people like in Argentina, for instance. And I would be curious. So, you've spent a lot of time working on loyalty systems and consumer behavior things before Fold. So, when did that like realization occur where you thought, you know what, this exact system might actually work better if it's powered by Bitcoin? Was there like a process for that where you kind of came to that conclusion?
It actually, I think it was I came at it from the opposite direction. What I
Oh.
saw was that Bitcoin was, when I came to the realization that Bitcoin was going to be something I felt was deeply important to the financial future of my generation. The next question is, well, how do you get people to use it or like it or understand it or know about it? And my background in loyalty and was perfect for that because loyalty at the end of the day is or loyalty systems and rewards and payments are actually all about how do you change consumer behavior? How do you
Mm.
create incentives that get people to do things that they may not normally do? And I looked at that as an excellent way for people to get a little bit of skin in the game, pique their curiosity and start down their journey discovering and learning about Bitcoin. And so it really was a lot of people need to know about this. How can I get
Mhm.
them to care about it and know about it? And this is what we came about through Bitcoin rewards. Fold was the created the category of this idea of, hey, instead of airline miles, let's give out Bitcoin as a reward. And the reason why that was such a big unlock for us is that about 95% of Americans participate in loyalty programs.
Mhm.
out is exactly the hypothesis came true that if we were able to get Bitcoin, small amounts of Bitcoin in the hands of everyday people in a risk-free way, over time, their curiosity would turn into conviction. And that's what
Mhm.
we've seen. We've seen our customers, we've given over $70 million of Bitcoin to our customers since we started.
Wow.
Many of them have more Bitcoin in their rewards account than they have in their savings accounts that they've been building working for decades. So it truly has been transformational. And I think the avenue of introducing Bitcoin via rewards has been an incredible success. Many people who would not have otherwise gotten involved are
Mhm.
buying and using Bitcoin now because of it.
Yeah, and early on, when you were still getting integrated into the Bitcoin space, did you feel like adoption would come from people buying it directly, or did you always kind of believe it needed to be embedded into something that people were already doing in order to kind of get people into it as like an on-ramp? Because it seems like very much that's kind of what Fold does
Yeah,
to an
I think
extent.
it's always been buying Bitcoin would always be a period that we would be in with Bitcoin. But the
Hmm.
vast majority would ultimately encounter Bitcoin through earning it through their paycheck, through their bonuses, through rewards programs, being gifted it, inheriting it. It was not going to be done from buying it. Now,
Hmm.
there's no doubt that right now, the majority of Bitcoin distributed to retail is direct result of buying it. And that's because Bitcoin is still going through its adoption and circulate distribution phase. But once it is
Hmm.
adequately dispersed, we believe that Bitcoin will be primarily earned, and that's why
Hmm.
Fold is always focused on those use cases, earning rewards, earning it with your paycheck, which you can do on the app. And then we recently announced the Bitcoin bonus program, which allows corporations and businesses to set up a benefits program to give Bitcoin bonuses to their employees. And so we just launched that with Steak and Shake. They have tens of thousands of employees who will be
Yeah.
getting bonuses in Bitcoin. And we think that's the future.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I want to kind of dial it back now and focus on Fold a little bit because we've kind of touched on it. And when people hear about earning Bitcoin instead of like airline points or something else, it clicks pretty quickly, especially for us that are already in the space. But when you zoom out here, Will, what is Fold actually? Fold is doing a lot more than just that. So, like, how do you personally describe what you've built so far to someone who's interested in learning about Fold?
So Fold is has built from the ground up for people who are curious or have already conviction that Bitcoin is an important part of their financial future. And what we have built is what I believe is the most comprehensive platform for managing your dollars and your
Mhm.
Bitcoin in the same place. And why that's important is because Bitcoiners and those interested in using Bitcoin for the long term also need a way that it's integrated into their core of their finances. It needs to be part of a
Mhm.
way they get access to home ownership. It needs to be accessible through bill pay to pay mortgages, to pay bills.
Mhm.
You should be earning Bitcoin on all your spending that goes into your long-term savings bucket. So we've always thought that Bitcoin and your dollar banking should not be separate. They should be in one place where you can get the benefits of both during this transition period. And so Fold
Mhm.
today means that every dollar that you spend is earning you Bitcoin. Every paycheck that comes in can be buying Bitcoin. You can be buying Bitcoin in a dollar cost average or recurring buy. You can do roundups. Really, it is a comprehensive banking platform for people who say Bitcoin is important to my future, and I want a financial platform that actually enables and makes that life easy. And that's what Fold does.
Well, that's great news because I actually want a Bitcoin platform that makes that life easy for me. So, Will, tell me, like, what is the return like on that? Like, what are the rewards in Bitcoin like? Like, what's that percentage like? What could people who join the Fold app like expect from that?
So we have a few ways to earn rewards. I think the most exciting is we have just this week begun the rollout of our Fold Bitcoin rewards credit card.
Ooh.
This is a traditional revolving unsecured line of credit that you earn 1.5 to 4% back on every purchase. And that depends on how much Bitcoin you buy on our platform. So the more Bitcoin you save with Fold, the more percent back you're going to get on your everyday
Mhm.
spending. Um, we have a merchant network, which is the largest in the country for Bitcoin rewards, which allows
Mhm.
our customers to earn an additional 10% on some of the largest national retailers in the country. And so
Mhm.
really from your credit spend to our merchant partners to our debit card, you can truly earn Bitcoin on absolutely everything that you buy.
That's freaking amazing. And when I was doing my due diligence before we had you on, Will, I saw something where you mentioned that Fold is more than a rewards app. It's really closer to a full financial platform. So my question for you is like, at what point did the vision shift from card with Bitcoin rewards to something that starts looking like maybe even a replacement for a checking account? What was that process like?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the original intention of Fold, is that could we create a experience that brings people into starting to get to understand Bitcoin, bring it as part of one of their assets in their portfolio through rewards. And if we're successful there, the natural next step is for people to say, well, I don't just want to be earning Bitcoin. I would like to convert my paycheck into it. So we built
Hmm.
a paycheck conversion that came out of the box with a FDIC insured checking account. And from there, we kept building more and more financial services really as a reflection of how our customers were growing. They said, I
Hmm.
don't just want to earn rewards anymore. I want access to all the other ways to earn Bitcoin, and I want all access to all the ways to use my Bitcoin in my daily life. And so, we have customers who are just starting their journey earning rewards. And on the very end of this other side of the spectrum, we have customers who live entirely on Bitcoin. They convert
Hmm.
100% of their paycheck into Bitcoin. They manage all of their household bills, their groceries, their spending all through Fold. That makes holding Bitcoin easy to accomplish all the day-to-day financial needs you have.
Very interesting. And also, Will, something else is like there's an interesting dynamic where someone can kind of use Fold every day and they can accumulate Bitcoin with ever actively deciding to invest in it. Do you see that as maybe the real unlock for adoption going forward? It's just providing these kind of nice little on-ramps to get people get their head into Bitcoin and to understand. And then over time, Bitcoin kind of speaks for itself. Is that kind of part of the adoption plan here?
I think the most successful paths for people getting involved with Bitcoin have always been the ones that remove the emotional roller coaster out of buying and holding Bitcoin.
Hmm.
And when you get a paycheck or maybe an end of year bonus and you make the call to throw it all into Bitcoin, personally, I think it's a great idea. But for many, it's an extremely stressful, anxiety-ridden thing to do. Right now, I've
Hmm.
seen Bitcoin draw down in the last 6 months almost 50%, one of the largest nominal drops in the history. And so
Hmm.
that is not for the faint of heart. That is an extremely emotional journey. And so all of the ways that people can accumulate Bitcoin that remove that emotional turmoil, that are more passive in the
Hmm.
background. I'm earning it on rewards. I'm just buying a little bit every week. I'm converting a little bit of my paycheck to it. I'm rounding up my change into it. All of these passive actions create a very simple and less stressful way of accumulating Bitcoin. And then from there, as you gain more conviction,
Hmm.
absolutely we can support you, doing larger buys that for someone just getting started might not be ready to do. So we look
Hmm.
for any ways to remove the anxiety and the emotion out of converting into Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. I remember when I got into the space initially and I was living and dying on every drawdown. I'm like, did I make a huge mistake? And it is an anxiety ridden, process when you first get into it. And it seems like you guys are building a really nice on-ramp so people can kind of dip their toe in it. And then, a couple years pass, they're like, whoa, this is outgaining everything else in my portfolio. And then the next evolution of their Bitcoin journey
Exactly
begins.
right.
So you guys are really doing God's work to get people in there, which I'm absolutely loving. And something else I noticed was that I think you guys partnered with Visa. Is that right?
Yeah, so we were actually back in 2019, I believe the first company that Visa ever partnered with in the Bitcoin world. Um,
Wow.
and we have had a great relationship ever since. We have launched our Bitcoin Rewards credit card on the Visa network. We're also working with Stripe on that. And having partners like that allow us to increase distribution, have better products, can scale faster. So it's been a really great partnership.
Yeah. So is that what you see the future of? Is Bitcoin and legacy rails going to be kind of merging into this new economic structure? Is that the way you see this moving eventually?
I think it's inevitable, and I think we're going to get.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get all of the ways. I am deeply in support of all efforts and businesses who are working on creating completely separate parallel structures for Bitcoin. Self-custody from the start,
Hmm.
native to Lightning and Bitcoin native payment rails. I think is excellent work and should be continued. And I believe more and more people will look to those services as they understand and gain more conviction about Bitcoin. That's naturally where they're going to go at the end of
Right.
that journey is to those types of products. Now, in the meantime, Bitcoin is such a massive opportunity. We've seen it from the ETFs. We've seen it from
Hmm.
companies who integrate Bitcoin into their stack, everywhere from fast food chains like Steak and Shake, who has their same store sales is absolutely outpacing all of their competitors, to Square merchant sellers who are accepting Bitcoin to lower their transaction fees across the board. Traditional businesses in America are rapidly seeing the benefits of including Bitcoin in their business. And that is not only
Hmm.
from the small mom and pop shop, but that's also to the largest companies in the world. And they're going to be actively integrating Bitcoin into their systems, which in my mind, create excellent bridges. But it's going to be one part of the Bitcoin infrastructure
Hmm.
going forward. And the beauty is that Bitcoin allows for both of those to exist. The totally parallel system of self-custody, and then to other more traditional other services that are integrated more in the traditional world that provide a really seamless a bridge between those two.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how we continue ingratiating Bitcoin into the traditional legacy financial network. And we're seeing it in real time, like you mentioned. So you're doing God's work out there. And we're going to talk more about that when we return, Will, because right now we're going to take a break here at Roxom TV News. But when we're back, Will and I are going to be talking more shop about Fold and maybe even some of today's top stories. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. More than 5 decades after the alleged incident, a courtroom in California has delivered a verdict with real financial consequences. A jury found Bill Cosby, now 88, liable for drugging and sexually assaulting Donna Motzinger in 1972, rewarding $60 million in damages. The case was made possible by California's Look Back law, which revived the statute of limitations for sexual assault survivors to bring civil claims. Now, Motzinger testified that she was a waitress at a Sausalito restaurant when Cosby invited her to a stand-up show, gave her wine and pills she believed were aspirin, and she later woke up at her home with her clothes removed. Cosby did not testify, and his legal team has already said they plan to appeal. After a criminal conviction in 2018 was overturned in 2021, this civil case became the final path forward. Now, what this underscores is that legal exposure doesn't necessarily expire with time, especially when laws shift, and that can reopen cases many assumed were permanently closed. And if you're flying anytime soon, the biggest risk might not be turbulence, it's whether there's enough staff to get you through security. In Washington, D.C., the government shutdown is now colliding directly with the airport operations, as Trump told Senate Republicans there will be no Department of Homeland Security deal unless Democrats pass the SAVE Act, a voter ID bill that already failed a Senate vote last week. Meanwhile, TSA is losing officers and fast, with around 400 quitting, call-out rates climbing above 50% at some airports, and ICE agents being deployed to help staff checkpoints. The acting TSA deputy administrator has warned that smaller airports could close entirely if conditions don't improve before the next pay cycle. At the same time, Senate leadership is preparing to leave for a 2-week break, which would pause negotiations while the pressure continues to build. Now, this shutdown has its 40th day on Friday, and every day Congress is out is another day TSA workers aren't getting paid. What this really comes down to is leverage, because an immediate visible problem, airport security, is now being tied to a broader political fight. And the longer that connection holds, the more likely everyday travel disruptions become part of the negotiating strategy. And the stock market is getting rid of its off switch, and that changes more than just trading hours. You see, the New York Stock Exchange is teaming up with Securitize to bring stocks and funds onto blockchain rails, with the long-term goal of enabling 24/7 trading. The idea is to make equities behave more like Bitcoin. No closing bell, no fixed schedule, just continuous global access from anywhere in the world. And on paper, that sounds like progress. We're talking faster settlement, broader access, and a more modern system that isn't tied to a physical exchange floor. But structurally, this isn't a revolution. You see, these assets are still issued and controlled by institutions, which means even if they live on a blockchain, they're not open or permissionless like Bitcoin. So the system becomes more efficient, but not more decentralized. At the same time, something else is driving this shift. Platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi are exploding by turning everything into a trade. We're talking elections, wars, headlines, and people are increasingly drawn to constant participation. So Wall Street isn't only upgrading infrastructure, it's responding to behavior. And that's where this starts to matter in everyday life, because when markets never close, access increases. But so does the pressure to stay engaged and to keep checking and to keep reacting. Now, once that becomes the norm, the real question isn't whether markets are more efficient, it's whether people end up investing more thoughtfully or simply trading more often. All right, we're bringing Will back to talk about this one. Will, the New York Stock Exchange is moving toward 24/7 trading on blockchain rails, and it's being pitched as progress. But at the end of the day, these are still traditional assets controlled by institutions. So my question to you is, how big of a change is this really? I'd love to get your beat on it.
I think value yearns to be free. And so what that means is it wants to cross borders. It wants to be open 24/7. It doesn't want to respect weekends or holidays. And that may be one of the biggest unlocks of Bitcoin in the entire digital asset space, is that the world wants more access to this. Now, you're exactly right. These are not bearer instruments, and they couldn't be further from the promises of Bitcoin. But to see Bitcoin continue to push the financial system to compete with it is very interesting to see. And I think as more of these, like you said, more of this stuff starts to happen, that's ultimately more access to Bitcoin over time. As people realize, again, these are not bearer assets. You can be censored, and all of those things that make Bitcoin great, I think people will rapidly understand.
Yeah, and part of the appeal, depending on who you are, is that the markets would never close, which sounds convenient. But do you think that that actually helps everyday investors at all, or does it just make it harder to step away from this? Because, like, we know Bitcoin, it's 24/7, it's exhausting. What are your thoughts?
So I think you're seeing a lot of the traditional networks and exchanges look to the world of crypto and digital asset exchanges, and they see them booking trading volumes and trading fees 24/7, 7 days a week. And they realize how much money is left on the table because they aren't able to have their users trading as much. At the end of the day, they're not making money on the upside of the market. They're making money on every trade going through the system. And so absolutely, this is a part of the incentive is to create the largest window for trades to occur and an environment where people are more plugged in to trade more often. And this is generally kind of what we're seeing happen across the ecosystem, is that the worlds of financial investing and gambling speculation are being rapidly pulled together into one arena. And that is largely driven by the fact of all of their profit incentives come from getting retail to trade more and more often on more and more things. It's not just about the stock market being 24/7. Let's bet on the weather. Let's bet on the sports games. Let's bet on what the stock market will do in a few days.
Hmm.
And all of that is contributing to massive uptick in exchange fees. And the
Hmm.
traditional world's not going to let the crypto industry take all of those spoils.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what effect do you think this will have on the crypto industry, specifically Bitcoin? Because, with the markets being closed on the weekend, we've kind of seen Bitcoin move because it's the one of the few things that's trading 24/7. So it's usually kind of the weekend canary in the coal mine. Do you think that 24/7 trading and that the New York Stock Exchange is going to affect that at all? Like, or just Bitcoin trading in general, now that it's not the only big player that you can, access 24/7?
I mean, as long as the 24/7 markets on the securities markets enable for the liquidity and ease of trading in and out of Bitcoin, then I believe it will have a major effect because right now Bitcoin is the only asset that you can get in and out of at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. Uh,
Hmm.
and if the traditional markets start to enable that type of exit there, I think you'll start to see investors protecting and moving their liquidity in different assets, not just in Bitcoin. Bitcoin just happens to be the only one they can do that with today. So I do
Hmm.
expect it will change some of that dynamic considerably. What I
Yeah.
believe is going to also happen is that, right now we're seeing some of the most traded assets on crypto exchanges like Hyperliquid are not crypto coins. They're gold, it's copper, it's
Mm.
silver, it is rare earths. And what ultimately you're seeing is maybe this is the beginning of the end of the kind of vaporware cryptocurrency industry that really, at the end of the day, may have just been this is a great market to trade, but really there's no
Mm.
underlying value. Now traders can have access to 24/7 markets on
Hmm.
commodities, like some of those that I mentioned, and
Yeah.
equities, and have just as much fun, just as much leverage in the traditional market as they used to have in crypto. But at least now there's a lot more fundamentals involved. And so I think this is going to be an absolute boon to Bitcoin, potentially allowing it to decouple more and more and get its own
Mm.
uh, uh, kind of operating space. But this might be
Yeah.
the death knell for the other cryptos.
Oh, I don't think anyone's going to miss Bonk coin or any of those other ridiculous ones too much. And one thing I found that was, I think, pretty interesting about your model with Fold, is that like you're kind of promoting steadily earning and saving Bitcoin over time, which is interesting because people have this association with crypto and Bitcoin, like it's fast money, but you guys are actually saying like, hey, no, this is a slow and steady accumulation over time. And now we're seeing the New York Stock Exchange go 24/7, which kind of ironically, like as you had mentioned, is pushing people toward constant trading. So how do you see those two behaviors kind of playing out against each other? Because it now sounds like Bitcoin is the responsible one, and the New York Stock Exchange wants everybody to trade all the time, which almost makes me feel a little more degen in a way. Like, any thoughts on that?
I think this is the existential divide of our time in terms of financial tools. We are really seeing deep lines being created between the financial tools that are there to primarily incentivize you to just be active 24/7 all the time, trading, being hyper responsive, hyper plugged in, and those that are saying, "Hey, wait, you don't have to do that. Let's
Hmm.
just return back to a much simpler idea of passive accumulation and compounding over time, and that's how you win." And what you are seeing this is in the world of, Coinbase and Robinhood and the Geminis, all of those, you open that app and they are constantly telling you the next thing you need to trade to make it big and make it, make it rich so you can
Hmm.
escape the rat race. And I believe Fold is representing a completely alternative vision to the future of what a financial tool should be.
Hmm.
And it remains to be seen how it goes. But what I am very confident on is that on about a 6 month time horizon, traders and speculators, 97% of them will lose money over that time horizon. And so
Hmm.
inevitably, that group that is shaping their financial platforms to push their customers into these type of gambling, speculative trading behaviors are ultimately pushing their customers into a game that they're going to lose. And so their customers become poorer over time. They lose their value. And that's the exact opposite of what we're here to do with Bitcoin. We want to
Mhm.
compound your value silently over time and also not ask you to get on the hamster wheel and constantly run around every day. We believe that there's a
Mhm.
better way of building a future for yourself.
Yeah, and I absolutely love Fold's approach. It kind of goes against what we initially thought in the crypto space, which it was sexy, right? It was like a get rich quick thing. But as we're seeing Bitcoin become a more important part of the current financial, institution, it's like, no, this is a slow and steady wins the race, just the way that anybody who's owned Bitcoin for over 4 years has never lost money. And with, have all these financial agencies pushing people to make trades of which they're going to lose 97% of the time or whatever, it's starting to look pretty good. So I think you guys are really doing God's work over there, kind of pushing the space in the right way that I think people are going to be more accepting of going forward and are going to be looking for answers to problems that are very much happening now and will be more present in the future. I want to move on to our next story here, Will. So hang 10 and I'm going to bring it back to chat about it. Because if you've ever sat in a meeting and thought, well, that sounded important, but I have no idea what was actually said, congratulations. You may have better critical thinking skills than your coworkers. Because according to a new study, the people most impressed by phrases like synergizing, scalable paradigms are also the worst at thinking clearly. Now, this study comes out of Cornell University, where researchers tested more than 1,000 office workers using something they're openly calling the corporate bullshit receptivity scale, which is exactly as brutal as it sounds. The premise is simple. Researchers wanted to see who actually believes corporate jargon is meaningful and who recognizes it for what it is. Basically, words just doing cardio. Now, to test that, cognitive psychologist Shane Luttrell built an AI powered corporate bullshit generator, which produced sentences like, "We will actualize a renewed level of cradle to grave credentialing," which sounds impressive until you realize it doesn't actually mean anything. Then participants were asked to rate how business savvy those statements sounded alongside real quotes from Fortune 500 CEOs. And here's where things get particularly interesting. The people who couldn't tell the difference between AI generated nonsense and actual executive language scored the lowest across the board. Analytical thinking, cognitive reflection, and practical decision making. So, in plain English, the more impressed you are by corporate buzzwords, the worse you are at thinking. Now, here's the twist that makes this less funny and more concerning. Those same people are reported higher job satisfaction, rated their bosses as more charismatic, and said they felt more inspired by company mission statements. And they weren't just consuming this language, they were using it themselves, which creates what the researchers call a feedback loop. Leaders who speak in vague, buzzword-heavy language attract employees who respond positively to it. Those employees get promoted, and eventually they become leaders who speak the same way. So over time, organizations don't just tolerate this language, they select for it. The study breaks corporate jargon into categories like pseudo-profound bullshit, which sounds deep, but isn't, persuasive bullshit, which is meant to influence, and evasive bullshit, which is used to avoid saying anything concrete at all. And the real-world examples are almost too perfect. Pepsi once described its strategy as the Pepsi DNA finds its origin in the dynamic of perimeter oscillation, which sounds like a science experiment gone horribly wrong. And a Microsoft executive described layoffs as executing strategy within an appropriate financial envelope, which is a very elegant way of saying people are getting fired. So this isn't just fringe behavior, it's happening at the highest level of major companies. And when you zoom out, this starts to matter in a much bigger way than just annoying meetings. Because if the people most impressed by empty language are also the ones most likely to see leaders as visionary, then get promoted themselves, organizations are effectively filtering for people who can't distinguish between clarity and confidence, which means decisions are increasingly made by people who are good at sounding right, not necessarily being right, though. And that shows up everywhere, from strategy to hiring to how companies communicate risk. So next time you hear someone say they're leveraging cross-functional synergies to optimize stakeholder alignment, the real question isn't what it means. It's whether anyone in the room actually knows the difference. We're bringing Will back. Will, you've spent your career building consumer products. So when you hear companies maybe promoting people who sound smart instead of actually thinking clearly, how much of that resonates with you and what you've seen inside organizations during your career?
Well, I've heard a lot of it. I've not only been building as a small, a small team entrepreneur, but I've also worked in corporations with, tens of thousands of of employees. And there's no doubt that corporate culture absolutely fosters an alignment around jargon. It creates buzzwords that allow people to signal competence. And
Mhm.
in a large organization where competence is difficult to show amongst a herd of other people, jargon is a great fast track to do so. And unfortunately, it's very easy to do it, which is makes it why it's so widespread. And so I've always preferred working in teams where competence is displayed by what you produce, not what you say or how you say it. And I think the world of AI and remote culture are all deeply exposing some of the rot of corporate culture that has really been there forever. And right now
Yeah.
we get to finally look at it from the outside and kind of say what a ridiculous culture this has created. We created up whole new languages for ourselves just to help ourselves get a raise, but we're really not producing anything more, which is obviously not the goal.
Yeah. And given that we kind of know and understand this, like, it would seem that clarity would be like a competitive advantage, yet a lot of companies still kind of default to this jargon. Is it really as simple as like it makes you sound smart in meetings and like that's why people use it? Like why is clear thinking so hard to maintain as organizations scale?
Well, clear thinking requires saying things that are uncomfortable, that are actually complex, that are not black and white, uh,
Hmm.
and it requires you to actually create a plan of action. Jargon allows you to use terminology to create the veil of effort and of a plan of action without actually doing anything. And so
Hmm.
as AI tools have come into the fray, the interesting thing is to see those AI tools talk back to us in the same jargon that we fed the AI tools.
Oh
They've
no.
been trained on our own jargon. And that's why a lot of this, the AI slop and all of this are like, you can really see what's an AI generated piece of content versus not. In the same way is, before without AI, you were able to, if you used any of those terms, you were most likely using that as a kind of a filter for, your own competence or those around you. And so we're the machines are giving us a mirror in which to look at ourselves right now.
Yeah, they're a monster of our own creation. What are we
Yes.
doing here? And, well, when you're building something like Fold, which is trying to simplify something as complex as Bitcoin, how intentional are you about avoiding that kind of vague, overcomplicated language? Because that would seem to be an important thing if you're trying to on ramp people that are new to the space. It can be intimidating at first.
I didn't immediately think of that connection, but I think it's really apt here. The world of Bitcoin, coming from a very small group of people, a very tight-knit community, first around the early adopters, cypherpunks to, political libertarians. They created their own jargon for Bitcoin and what Bitcoin was going to do for that world, for the world. And oftentimes, just those terms that are used are things that can be off-putting for the rest of the world to hear because they are uncomfortable. And so, what we have found is removing that jargon, removing the the insider ways of describing Bitcoin and what it's going to do for the world, and universalizing it to really just speak to the fact of people want to feel secure. They want to feel like they're building a future. Uh,
Mhm.
Much more basic things that don't really immediately sound like political or economic policy or ideology. These are just very simple Maslow's hierarchy. I want to put food on the table. I want to be emotionally there for my family. I want to be able to build a family. All of those things are what I think Bitcoin speaks very directly to. And so it's
Mhm.
a little bit finding a new language in which to speak about Bitcoin will ultimately open up more and more people to it. As
Mhm.
opposed to now, I think there are a lot of people who are just guarded by it. And unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with what the broader world of crypto has done to Bitcoin's reputation. And so again, I
Mhm.
think it's creating a new language in which to speak to Bitcoin that speaks to much more base basic needs of people, rather than coming at it from a hardcore political or economic philosophy.
I love that. And you guys are really doing it the right way and are kind of driving that charge of helping people understand Bitcoin and language in terms that they can really wrap their heads around. Because like I mentioned, it can be very intimidating at first, but you at Fold are really doing it the right way. And with that being said, I'm sure you've gained at least a couple of new fans in our audience this morning, Will. So for those out there that are looking to learn more about Fold and maybe just like the cut of your jib and want to see whatever hot takes you might have on the interwebs, what's the best place I can send to learn about Fold and see whatever you're up to?
Well, I think best place is to download the app. We're Fold in the app stores. We just released our credit card, so you can get on that invite list and get it relatively soon. You can follow me on Twitter, on X at Will Reeves, and let me know what you think about Fold, about Bitcoin. Always like to have those conversations.
Amazing. Well, we certainly loved having this conversation with you, Will. So I want to thank you for your time and expertise today and breaking down all the amazing things you and the team at Fold are up to. We're got to have you back sometime because it sounds like you guys are always coming up with new products to offer for the community. So I want to thank you so much for your time today, and you're welcome back anytime. It was a blast.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.
Thanks, Will. Cheers. Have a nice Tuesday, my friend. We're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News. When we're back, we have one more story to wrap up today's news. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. 3 weeks of Iranian missiles landing on countries that wanted absolutely nothing to do with this war may have accomplished something U.S. diplomacy could not: build a coalition that's now seriously considering joining the fight. Saudi Arabia and the UAE say they might need to get involved. Saudi Arabia is the clearest example of that shift, as according to the Wall Street Journal, the kingdom has now agreed to let U.S. forces use its King Fahd air base, reversing its pre-war stance that its territory wouldn't be used for attacks on Iran. Now, the UAE is heading down a similar path, shutting down the Iranian hospital and Iranian club in Dubai, saying they were being used to advance regime-linked agendas. Phones, WhatsApps, websites, gone. They're also considering freezing billions in Iranian assets, which would cut off access to foreign currency and trade at a moment when Iran's economy is already under pressure from sanctions and inflation. And importantly, they're pushing against any ceasefire that leaves Iran's military capabilities intact, which tells you where their head is at strategically. Because this hasn't been a contained conflict. You see, since the war began, Iran has struck all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries. The UAE alone has intercepted more than 2,000 attacks. Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG facility, which handles about 20% of global supply, has taken direct hits themselves. And Saudi Arabia has been intercepting missiles aimed at its capital. So who can blame the Gulf states for publicly saying they won't participate in attacks on Iran, but then launching missiles from Bahrain? Now, this video was verified by Storyful, and it indicates that some launches of U.S. ground-based missiles were used to attack Iran came from Bahrain. The U.S. military declined to confirm whether Arab countries are involved, saying it would let Gulf states speak for themselves, which is about as subtle as a wink in a press conference. Now, here's where things are going to get a little more complicated. You see, even as these countries inch closer to aligning with the U.S., they're also frustrated with Washington. After an earlier Israeli strike triggered Iranian retaliation that damaged Gulf infrastructure, Arab states pushed the U.S. to prevent further escalation. They thought they had an understanding. Instead, Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, and within hours, Iran hit Ras Laffan Saudi facilities and infrastructure across Kuwait and the UAE. So now, Gulf states are unified in their frustration with Iran, but they're also realizing how little control they actually have over an ally they've invested heavily in. Meanwhile, the IRGC is raising the stakes even further. After Trump's 48-hour ultimatum to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, they threatened to hit power plants supplying U.S. bases and completely destroy companies with American ownership stakes. Then, Monday morning, Trump posted that the U.S. and Iran had held very good and productive conversations and extended the timeline by 5 days, which sent markets higher and oil lower. Iran denied it within the hour, saying there was no dialogue and accusing the U.S. of trying to manipulate energy prices. State television even ran a graphic claiming the U.S. president had backed down. When asked about the contradiction, Trump doubled down. Take a look.
Iran's foreign ministry says you're not telling the truth when it comes to productive conversations.
Well, they're going to have to get themselves better public relations people. We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict, and I think it'll end it very, very substantially.
Now, according to Axios, what's actually happening is that countries like Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan are passing messages between the two sides. So both versions are technically true. They're just describing very different interpretations of the same process. And markets, for their part, are reacting to the headlines first and the reality later. Oil dropped and stocks surged on Trump's post alone before Iran's denial even hit. And that pattern has repeated itself throughout this conflict. Hormuz is still effectively closed, transit is down 94%, and Israel and Iran are still exchanging strikes. But maybe Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent sees something others do not. Let's take a look.
Is the president in the process of winding down this war or escalating the conflict?
Again, they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate.
Because here's the real situation. The newly proposed 5-day window is real, but so is everything surrounding it. And for the Gulf states, this is the dilemma they're now stuck in, because joining the war carries enormous risk. But sitting out a conflict that's already being fought from your territory, hitting your infrastructure, and threatening your economic lifeline might be the bigger gamble. All right, gang. Well, that's a wrap for today's story here at RoxomTV News. Did you say we have Walker with us? No? Okay. Well, we're wrapping up today. If you haven't already, I need you to do one simple thing for me, and that's to do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV, wherever you choose to do your doom scrolling of choice. And we'll be back tomorrow with more of the day's top stories. Also, stay tuned right here at Roxom TV, because next up is the most patriotic man in Bitcoin Walker America. He's up next, and I'll be joining him for the beginning of the show to talk shop and hopefully make sense of all the chaos in the world. So stay tuned for more of that in just a bit. In the meantime, I will see you boys and girls right here on my Roxom TV News show tomorrow at our normal time of 8 a.m. PST. So until then, stay safe, stay informed, and stay right here at Roxom TV News, because I'll be back with Walker America in just a few. See you then.